Welcome to another fantastic Java programming lecture. Today we're going to do an example that involves some advanced use of the mod operator. A lot of students ask me, why is the mod operator useful? Who wants or is even interested in the remainder of integer division? Well, hopefully this example will answer that question. So let's take a look at the specifications. In this example, we're being asked to write a Java program that accepts a positive integer as input between 1 and 99,999 inclusive, and this number is going to represent the number of seconds that will be used to calculate the most number of hours, minutes, and seconds that it represents. The program will then display the results. So hint, we're going to use some facts. There are 3,600 seconds in 1 hour and 60 seconds in 1 minute. So the sample output that they're giving us to help us write the program is we'll have a prompt, and we'll have the program print out this prompt, enter the number of seconds between 1 and 99,999 inclusive, and this is just a sample of somebody typing in, say 10,000, and then the display, and this is what our program will have to do, is display 10,000 seconds is equal to 2 hours, 46 minutes, and 40 seconds. So before we actually do the program, which will involve writing pseudocode first, let's figure out the algorithm. So how did they come up with 10,000 seconds equals this many hours, minutes, and seconds? Well, they started with this kind of calculation, that 10,000 seconds is, if we convert it to hours, we know that, given the fact, there are 3,600 seconds in 1 hour. So the seconds will cancel, and then we'll be left with a certain number of hours. Now, we could do that division, long division arithmetic over here on the side, or if you prefer, you can just use a calculator. So if you wanted to use a calculator, and I have one ready to go here, you could enter in 10,000 divided by 3,600, and that gives us 2.7778. But we are only interested in the number of whole hours, so we know that's going to represent 2 whole hours. So if we go back to our calculation here, we know that we're going to have 2 hours plus some leftover seconds. So the 0.778 is giving us how many hours are left. But let's do this calculation over here on the side so we could see the leftover seconds. So if we come over here and we found out that there are a maximum of 2 whole hours, 3,600 times 2 is 7,200, and if we subtract 7,200 from 10,000, I believe we get 2,800. So we have 2,800 seconds still left over that we need to convert to the maximum number of minutes, and then we'll have some leftover seconds. So how do we get this remainder with Java? So in other words, the leftover seconds is what? Well, it was the 10,000 mod 3,600. That's equal to the 2,800, that remainder. The mod operator, if you'll recall, is also known as the remainder operator. Well, we need to take these leftover seconds and see how many whole minutes we can get. So we're going to take this value, 10,000 mod 3,600, which is the same as 2,800, and convert these seconds into minutes. And we're going to use the handy fact, they told us up here, there's 60 seconds in 1 minute. So we write 1 minute per 60 seconds. The seconds will cancel, and we'll now have the number of minutes. So if you don't feel like doing this kind of arithmetic in your head or on a piece of paper, although I always recommend doing it on a piece of paper, you could go over to your calculator once more, and we'll ask, well, what is 2,800 divided by 60? And we get 46 minutes and some leftover minutes, 0.6667 leftover minutes. So we see that we have the 46 minutes and we have the leftover minutes, which were, let's remind ourselves, 0.6667 leftover minutes. but I'm not interested in portions of a minute. So how much of this is representing the leftover seconds we have? Well, let's go over here and do this long division on the side. So over here we know that 60 goes into 2800 46 times. So what is 60 times 46? Well, if you're not feeling like doing any arithmetic in your head, that's what a calculator is for, and we get 2760. So we come over here and write 2760. And then what's left over? Well, it turns out that after you do the arithmetic here, we'll have 40 seconds left over. So 40 seconds is our leftover seconds, and that's what it says in the display. But how do we get that? Well, we took what we had before, which was the leftover minutes, if you'll recall, which was 10,000 mod 3,600, and that value we divided by 60 and looked at the remainder when we divided by 60, which is found by taking this value and modulo operator 60, and this gives you the total number of seconds that's required. So now we see how we got all of this. So how could we, before we write down the program, let's do some pseudocode. So the pseudocode for this program, to match the specs here, we first need to start by prompting and capturing the input. So I'm going to put prompt and capture input as the first module, or chunk of code, if you will. The next thing we're going to need to do is calculate the number of hours. And we found that we can do that calculation by taking the input and doing integer division, dividing it by 3,600. Then we're going to calculate the minutes, and we found that the minutes could be found by taking that input mod 3,600, so that was the remainder, which was leftover seconds, and we divided that by 60, and that gave us the number of whole minutes that we needed for this. And then finally, we calculate, well, almost finally, we'll still do the display. The last calculation is calculate the number of seconds, which was the number of leftover seconds, and then the remainder when we divide by 60, which is mod 60. And finally, we will go ahead and display our results as the last chunk of code. And we can do the display in a single print statement, and we're going to use printf because that's my preferred. So here's the pseudocode for all of this. So how would we actually write a program to do this? Well, I happen to have NetBeans all ready to go here. So since we're going to need to capture user input, we are going to need to have an import statement up here right before the public class. So let's go ahead and write the import statement. Do you remember what that import statement is supposed to be? Well, it's going to be import java.util. It's in the utility library, and you can either put .scanner or my preferred is .star. So that allows you to have access to all of the utility library, even if you don't need it all. And then here in our public class, we're going to do our main method. So public static void main, which all Java programs need a main, and we're going to put string bracket bracket args, and remember we need an opening parenthesis there. And so then what? Well, let's label some of our variables that we're going to need. We of course want to have the original input, which you could call seconds if you want. And then how about we have hours and minutes? So there are the variables that we're going to have, but we also need to have a scanner. So how about scanner? I'll call it stdin, standard in. Whoops. Oh, I can't spell today. And since we're instantiating a new object, you always need the word new in Java, and then say scanner one more time, but you need to spell that correctly. and then in parentheses system.in. So we're setting up the input stream. Now, how about if we do a prompt and tell the user at the keyboard to please enter the value. So remember, for prompts, use print, not println, so it looks better. And so if we're going to follow the specs, we need to have the words enter the number of seconds between 1 and 99,999, and we'll put inclusive so they know it's okay to enter in 99,909, and we're going to do a colon and a space, and the space is to make it look pretty, so the input that they type in doesn't go right next to your words. And so there's your prompt, and then of course we have to capture it. So seconds, to spell that correctly, is equal to the name of our scanner dot next what? Well, since we're going to capture an integer, we're going to put int with empty parentheses and then a semicolon. And so now we've captured the number of seconds, total number of seconds we're going to be dealing with. So in order to compute the hours, remember we're going to have hours is going to equal the value that we read in, which is seconds, divided by 3,600, because remember there were 3,600 seconds in 1 hour. And then for the minutes, if you'll recall from our calculations, we took the remainder that you get when you do the division of seconds with 3,600. So we're going to go 3,600 seconds mod, and it's nice to put a space in between on either side of your operators. And I should have done that on the previous line, so let's make it look pretty here on either side of the divide symbol. So you're going to go seconds modulo 3,600. That was the leftover seconds, remember, and we divided that value by 60 because there's 60 seconds per minute. And then finally, we want to have what's the leftover seconds. So the new value of seconds, which is the final leftover seconds, will be the number of overall seconds that we had from the first calculation, which was seconds mod 3,600, and then we're going to take the remainder that we got when we were finding the minutes, so we're going to mod that with 60. And so there's your total number of seconds. And then we're going to do a system, and you can do probably a print or a println, but usually it looks nicer if you do a printf or a println. So I'm going to do a printf just because that's my favorite flavor of printing out. And so in here, you're going to put what you want and then comma if you have any arguments, and that would be variables that you want to print out. And we do. So what are we going to put here for the message? Well, if we follow the specs, we need to give how many seconds that the input was, which I forgot to capture and keep. So that's going to be a problem. So what do I need to do here? What I should have done, if I'm going to fix this code now, and the reason why I don't want to put seconds here is because it's no longer 10,000. I'm going to redo this, and this is very common. I'm going to put value for my original input, and then capture the value, and then all of these were value instead of changing them to seconds because we lost our original input value. So this is good for you to see the problem here because the old value of 10,000 wasn't saved somewhere because we changed the value that we captured by putting it into seconds. So now I'm going to be safe. So now I can say %D, that's going to be the 10,000 seconds, and then we'll put a space after that, and then we're going to put the word seconds, and then we're going to have an equal sign, and then we're going to say how many hours. So we're going to put a space, and we'll go %D space, the word hours, comma, %D space minutes, comma, well, they didn't have a comma there. They just had the word and how many leftover seconds. So %D seconds, and they did have a period there. Then after the double quote comma, now we're going to put over here what those format specifiers corresponded to. So the first one was value. The second one was the hours. The third one was the minutes. And the last one was the seconds. So, oops, and we have a red bubble. Why? Because we forgot the semicolon at the end of the statement. Now, it still has a problem with all of this, so I'm trying to find out why. Oh, I see. I spelled minutes wrong. That's a problem. It's letting me know. Okay, it looks error-free at this moment. Of course, that doesn't always mean you're safe. I'm going to save the file, come over here and right-click and run the file. Let's see what happens. Okay, I'm going to enter in 10,000 seconds, and there is our output. And notice the build successful came up on the same line as our display. I don't like that. So what I should have done in the println statement right before the double quotes, let's do that now, is put a \n so it'll look prettier when we run it. So let's run it again. Enter the number of seconds here, so I'm going to put 10,000 and hit return. And now that looks a lot prettier. If I run it again just to see if it'll work with other numbers, just for kicks, how about if we try entering in the max number of seconds it's allowing us to enter, 99,999. What happens? Well, let's check it out. Okay, that's going to be 27 hours, 46 minutes, and 39 seconds. Okay. And that concludes this example. So good luck and happy programming.